Good evening, everybody. My name is Mary Travers Murphy. I'm CEO of the Family Justice Center and host tonight on behalf of Buffalo Toronto Public Media. Welcome to Relationship Abuse, the Pandemic Within COVID, part of WBFO's Mental Health Initiative. We're very grateful because it's funded by the Patrick P. Lee Foundation. Tonight, we're going to discuss ways in which the pandemic and related economic and social factors have heightened situations of domestic abuse, relationship abuse, as it relates to mental health, as well as explore our local and national many resources available to help, because there is hope. An important note about tonight's virtual event: we welcome questions. We encourage you to put them in the chat box. Understand that your name will be associated with them. And also, if you're listening, tuning in, and you're feeling that what we're talking about is resonating with you, or it's got you worried about somebody else, feel free to pick up the phone and call the Family Justice Center. Our number is 716-558-7233. The Family Justice Center caters to people and their children in abusive relationships. We have a wonderful model with numerous partners on site and dozens of partners off site to help anybody who's trying to figure out what might be going on in a relationship that they feel is unsafe, or maybe they feel they're controlled, or maybe they feel like something just isn't right. We're going to talk tonight about all the red flags, all the resources available, as I mentioned, and stress to you that this is a preventable public health crisis in our community. We have two phenomenal experts with us tonight, Dr. Vanessa Tyrone. She is a licensed clinical psychologist and owner of Good Neighbor Psychology. She is a researcher. She's an expert on treatment and trauma. She has worked with veterans, survivors of domestic violence, pregnant women, postpartum women. She's going to kick us off tonight and talking about what it is we're actually talking about. How do we define relationship abuse? How do you know if you or somebody you love is involved in an abusive relationship?
Thanks, Mary. It's an important question. And even the term abuse can be a little bit tricky, right? Because we could have a partner who's doing something that makes us feel unsafe, but we're not usually used to thinking of them as an abusive person. But we usually think of there being 3 or 4 main types of this behavior. It can be verbal, so things like swearing and name calling; physical, things like pushing, shoving, hitting, or threatening serious physical harm. It can include sexual behavior as well, in terms of pressuring someone to have sex when they don't want to, or physically forcing someone to. It can also include stalking behaviors, which are efforts to keep the relationship going after you've indicated that you don't want to continue anymore.
And the Family Justice Center stresses, when we go out and talk to the public about this, that it absolutely doesn't have to be physical to be considered abusive. And you talked about emotional, psychological, financial, sexual abuse. Ava Thomas is the operations manager at the Family Justice Center. She supervises all of our advocates and our forensic medical unit nurse. She's responsible for making sure all of the on-site partners and off-site partners are on the same page and available. And anytime somebody calls, uncertain if they're even in an abusive relationship, our advocates are highly trained. Ava has a master's degree in social work and comes from a background as a physician's assistant and is also a survivor. Ava, talk to us about the big red flags. How do you know if you're in an abusive relationship? And what did we see during COVID that put a whole different spin on these relationships?
Yeah, so the biggest red flag that we want to pay attention to is if you feel unsafe physically, emotionally, sexually, any type of feelings of unsafety in a relationship, even if you can't identify anything else, that's something important and that we want to take notice of. In addition to that, one of the biggest indicators that someone is in extreme risk in their relationship is strangulation. And oftentimes someone doesn't identify the action of someone putting their hands around their neck or covering their nose or mouth as strangulation, but any form of cutting off someone's breathing. And when that happens, when a strangulation occurs, even just one time, the risk of lethality increases 750%. And so that is something that we absolutely want to pay attention to and understand the seriousness of that. In addition to feeling unsafe and the cutting off of breathing, we look at things like change in appearance. If you are having a hard time getting to work on time or concentrating, oftentimes that's because of all the stress and things that are happening at home in your relationship. We want to take notice of if you're taking phone calls, and if it's your partner, you're leaving the room or you have to leave an event soon because they're angry and you know that they're going to get upset. Isolating yourself from friends or family members because you don't want them to know what's happening. And every situation is different, and we understand that, but those are some of the bigger indicators of, hey, something's not okay here.
And you
And
mentioned isolation. And I just want to pull up a slide here because I think it's so significant. We know that perpetrators and abusers and controllers, because at the heart and soul of this is control, are all kind of playing out of the same handbook. And many of these relationships tend to go on the same path, follow the same trajectory. But let's look at this slide of isolation. And it's one key and very effective strategy for abusing and controlling one's partner, isolating them from friends and family and people who, when they see what's going on, can kind of zero in and maybe give them advice. How often do you see these in relationships, Ava? And how prevalent is domestic violence and relationship abuse here in Western New York and across the country?
It's extremely prevalent. If you have the ability to fall in love, you unfortunately have the ability to experience domestic violence. And so it's something that crosses all genders, all religions, any sexual orientation or identity. It does not matter. And here at the Family Justice Center, we found in particular with the onset of the pandemic, there was a 74% increase in the number of calls and clients that we were providing services and supports for. And that has not stopped since the day quarantine started. It's something that we are dealing with daily in terms of the high call numbers, high client numbers. On top of that, these high lethality and very complicated cases.
Okay.
And yeah, we just saw this tremendous increase, and we do not see it stopping anytime soon.
I want to bring Dr. Vanessa Trioni in at this point. Vanessa, what do we know about mental health issues and how COVID has had a great impact on that, and the fact it takes on average prior to COVID somebody 7 to 8 attempts to permanently leave an abusive relationship? They return.
Yeah, unfortunately, similar to the increases in people experiencing violence, there have been dramatic increases in anxiety and depression during the pandemic. So sometimes I encourage people to think about even just what are some of our basic symptoms of depression, of PTSD. They include things like having low self esteem, difficulty concentrating, trouble sleeping. All of these types of symptoms can make it really difficult to even go about daily tasks, caring for your children, going to work, going to school. So then, if you think about someone who's experiencing all of these symptoms due to the abuse that they're experiencing, and then trying to take up like a Herculean effort of actually trying to leave this person doing something so courageous, it's so much harder to do with the symptoms that they're suffering with. So we really are talking about, unfortunately, a lot of barriers, which is why it's so important that there are organizations like the Family Justice Center to be able to help people during these times so you don't have to do it by yourself.
Can we just get a little taste right now of what kind of effective trauma-informed treatment is out there for people who may be thinking, where do I even begin? I tried to go to counseling and it didn't work. There's new effective trauma-informed counseling. What's it look like and how effective is it?
Absolutely. There are evidence-based therapies, which mean that there have been good numbers of research studies shown that if you do a full course of this talk therapy, only 8 to 12 sessions, people can see very significant reductions in their PTSD, depression, anxiety symptoms, and they can be less likely to experience violence in the future. So these treatments are a really important resource available to people. And another kind of fortunate thing that's happened during the pandemic is that many of these treatments are available via telehealth. And research indicates that they're actually equally as effective if you do them over a video chat or over the phone as if you had gone to see someone in person.
The Family Justice Center is home to one of the only forensic medical unit dedicated solely to domestic violence in all of New York State. Ava, you supervise our forensic medical unit nurse. 3 months into quarantining and the pandemic, our nurse was seeing absolutely outrageous stories of violence. And she was hearing from our clients that the abusers were suffering some mental health issues as well. Can you discuss that?
Yes, we were hearing from our clients and from our forensic medical unit nurse, there was an extreme increase in simultaneous strangulations and sexual assaults. And someone who is experiencing that just alone, that on its own is horrific. But you add on the fact that it was a pandemic, that there was this mandatory quarantine and isolation where they were literally trapped in their homes with their abusers. It was creating this hurricane of effects that we are still seeing the aftermath of.
And again, we're seeing
Mary,
a
can
question.
I add a comment?
Yeah.
Sorry. So sometimes we also use this language of like abuser and victim to describe the different partners in the relationship. And I think it's also important to keep in mind that sometimes violence is unidirectional, right? Where one person is kind of experiencing the majority of it. Other times it can be bidirectional, where both partners may engage in some degree of violence or aggression. And that can be a barrier sometimes to individuals reaching out for help if they know that there have been moments where they've done something regrettable and maybe engaged in some aggression themselves. But I think we also want people to know that regardless of whether you've only experienced some of this violence yourself or if you've also engaged in some of it, you also deserve help, both kind of dealing with what's going on in the relationship and any symptoms you might be having related to it.
We do hear from survivors frequently. Well, I hit back, therefore I couldn't be a victim. And that's why it's so important to be connected with an advocate who's highly trained, up on best practices with a lot of experience. I saw in the chat box, has abuse increased significantly? We talked about that at the very beginning. We've seen at the Family Justice Center a 74% skyrocketing increase. Ava, can you address that and address why it took a pandemic to be able to serve clients even better once we were ordered to figure it out overnight how to offer all of our services and our partner services remotely?
Yeah, with the onset of the pandemic, we were finding abusers who were no longer working, who had a lot of time on their hands, and an abuser with a lot of time on their hands is able to perpetrate that abuse in completely different ways than before. And so we had clients reporting, they've never put their hands on me before, and now it's almost daily I'm being punched or kicked or hit, or the verbal abuse was increasing. And we found that even though the quarantine has lifted and restrictions are starting to lessen, that doesn't mean then that abuse is lessening either. Once that line has been crossed in the relationship, it will always be there as potential to be crossed and crossed again. And so even though we're nearing this different phase of the pandemic, it's no longer this lockdown piece, we're still hearing these horrific cases.
In terms of serving clients remotely, I think the courts overnight pivoted to hearing the orders of protection remotely. Can you talk about that and talk about why the increase has sustained?
Yeah. One of the brighter spots of the pandemic, if you want to refer to it as that, is the fact that we can provide services remotely. Historically, before we had to have that person in front of us to provide those services, and now they can pick up the phone, they can reach us by chat box or by email, and it's a lot less pressure to talk to someone over the phone rather than having to go down to a building, find parking, wait in a waiting room, all those different things that runs through someone's head of, hey, if I've got to go here to get this done, it's going to take a lot of time and effort, and I just don't have that time and effort. And that's one of the things that we've been able to realize through this, is that we can provide these services in the same way remotely very effectively. Our partners, from the onset of the pandemic and the onset of that quarantine, it was all hands on deck. Everyone worked together. We were in contact more with family court and neighborhood legal services and, Buffalo police than we were in person on site. And we were able to transform the way we provide services. It has been tremendous and a game changer.
We've heard so often, repeatedly over the years, from survivors and clients in the midst of it saying the danger was off the chain. But the overwhelming emotion that could trump fear, right? You leave, I will kill you. That's right out of the handbook of a controller. You leave, I'll kill the children. You leave, I'll kill myself. Do you want that on your life? The overwhelming emotion, shame, and embarrassment. And we feel that was an embarrassment to even, or a barrier for people to walk through the doors, even though we understand what's going on. So I think the fact that remote was so successful, that we, as we move forward on the other side of the pandemic, will continue to offer anybody who wants all of our services remote. We also know that people have this vision in their brains and minds of what a typical domestic violence victim looks like. And we know that this comes in every form of relationship. Vanessa, Dr. Taroni, do you want to talk about that a little bit? And we have a slide that we can pull up to just show you the stats.
Yeah, so I think you're right. We can have like kind of stereotypes about what an abuse survivor can look like. But really, as Ava mentioned earlier, anyone who can be in a relationship, unfortunately, can experience these things. And I also like to encourage people to think about the fact that these behaviors don't typically start at the beginning of the relationship. It's been after you've connected a bond, oftentimes after you've started to kind of build a life together and have all these shared investments, that then these problematic behaviors start. And so an individual can see themselves as very strong, independent, and still unfortunately experience some of these behaviors that we know can take a toll on their relationships, their work, their mental health across the board.
Ava, what are we seeing at the Family Justice Center? We know that 1 in 3 young girls in that 10 to 12 to 24 to 26-year-old age group, 1 in 3, 1 in 4 women, 1 in 7 boys and men. We absolutely see boys and men at the Family Justice Center, same-sex partners. We see it all. Talk about that and how we cater our services to them.
Yeah. Historically, awareness and research has catered to more heterosexual relationships, a male abuser and a female survivor. And if you are someone outside of that you're not seeing yourself in those awareness campaigns, in posters, and you're not seeing yourself in the research. And so then that alone is isolating, and it affects how someone reaches out for services and whether or not they want to move forward with anything if they don't feel that support or feel like they can be seen and heard. One of the things that we work really hard every single day to do is provide trauma-informed services. And so we look at the person as a whole, who they are as a whole, what they've experienced throughout their entire lifetime, and how that affects what is happening in this moment with them. And so we are always honoring that piece, and we are all about client empowerment and choice. You will never be forced to receive a service or support that you are uncomfortable with or unsure of or you don't want. And we meet people wherever they are.
I think this is a good time to talk to people who suspect somebody that they love or know or work with is in an abusive relationship. Ava, what is the best way to have a conversation with them? And if you lack the words or the confidence, what do you do?
Pick up the phone and call the Family Justice Center. You will be linked with an advocate who will go over the particular situation that you're noticing, and we will tailor the verbiage that you can use to whatever is happening. Your words are so important. Your words can be the difference between someone feeling like, oh, this is a safe space. Okay, I can do this, to, oh, I'm being judged. My partner's being judged. Absolutely not. And they just shut down. And so linking with an advocate, and again, you don't even have to give your name. If you want to say your name is Mickey Mouse, Minnie Mouse, it doesn't matter. That's fine. You can have that anonymity, but still receive the services and supports necessary. So we encourage anybody to reach out, whether you suspect it for yourself or you suspect it for someone you know or love.
Yeah. Vanessa, mental health. What do people trying to help somebody need to understand about the mental health issues that the person they're trying to help is experiencing? And how should that play into their approach? And as Ava said, the words and the importance of the words.
So, some of the most common mental health symptoms to look out for if you're concerned that a friend or loved one is experiencing these types of abuse are post traumatic stress disorder. So, that can include things like being jumpy or being easily kind of triggered, depression, feeling low and blue. Substance use problems as a way to kind of numb some of what the abuse is like making them feel, and unfortunately, suicidal thoughts. And so it's important to look out for all of these things. And kind of like Ava alluded to, the biggest thing is to show that you care and that you'll be there to support the other person in whatever it is they need. We actually know that support is a pretty big predictor of whether folks will be able to leave successfully, whether folks will experience ongoing symptoms. So it's finding those ways to express that you care, regardless of whether it sounds clumsy or awkward, and trying hard not to say things that might be kind of blaming or might be experienced as like judgmental by the survivor.
Right. And I think it's important to understand that a victim will return on average 7 to 8 times. Ava, when you talk to clients every day, every hour of every day, what are some of the barriers that you see, and how often do our clients return, even that very day, to the abuse? And in some cases, we know that can be the smartest, safest decision with a safety plan. What's that all about?
Yeah, so each situation is completely different, and we recognize that. And sometimes we have to work with someone multiple times throughout, a week, a day, a month, and we're safety planning for them to stay at home because that is the safest thing, an order of protection or calling police. That those are things that can increase violence and increase the severity of what's happening. And so we will safety plan around that. We look at every single aspect of what is going on, and okay, if this route is being chosen, what could the outcome be? What could something positive or negative come out of that? And we weigh those options with the survivor. And again, it's not always the safest thing. And that can be hard, especially when there's friends and family members and people worried on the outside of, hey, I thought you called the Family Justice Center. Where's your order of protection? And why didn't you leave yet? And it's not always safest, and it's not always best.
If you're
And Ava, if I can add to that, you know, kind of like you're saying, it's not always safest to leave, even though that might be what we want for our loved one, right? And someone who's perpetrating these behaviors can say things like, I will kill you if you leave. Like Mary said, I will hurt the children, hurt the pets if you leave. And those aren't always empty threats, right? Sometimes they mean those things. And so sometimes, even though it's counterintuitive, kind of coming back is can keep someone safe temporarily. There were also questions in the chat about what would examples be of like judging language or language to avoid. And Ava, I think you alluded to that too as well, like in terms of saying, well, you know, he does this, right? Why haven't you left already? Or she does this if the perpetrator identifies as female, and kind of trying to like meet someone where they're at, as opposed to maybe criticizing how they got in this position in the first place, or the fact that they have not left or separated from this person already.
Ava, and you can talk about this at the Family Justice Center. We talked about it a little bit, but it's in the chat box. Is there an advocate that specializes in same-sex couples, or all familiar with the, or at all familiar with the community? You want to pull up that second slide again. It talks about intimate partner violence in men and same-sex partners, because those stats speak volumes. And our advocates, and they're trained to answer that question, Ava. How would you address it?
Yeah, all of our advocates are trained to work with individuals who identify as LGBTQI+. We take that extremely seriously, and we want to ensure someone's safety. And we understand, you know, we hear a lot from someone like, hey, my employer doesn't know that I'm with a same-sex person. Like, I don't want them to find out. They have text messages and pictures of me. They're going to show my boss, like, I'm going to lose my job, and this panic sets in. And so we have not only the normal barriers, the regular barriers that everyone faces if they're in an abusive relationship, but when you add on the fact that this individual is from a vulnerable population, you have additional fears, additional shame, all these other factors that weigh in. Sometimes we've heard from clients like, you know, I don't know if I'm calling the right place. Like, are you guys okay with me being gay? We hear that a lot. And they want to make sure that they're heard and they're validated. And sometimes they don't know if that's the case. And we make it very clear this is a safe space for any and everyone that is experiencing abuse.
We've talked a few times about orders of protection, restraining orders, and we always get a couple questions. Do they work? And isn't it just a piece of paper? Can you talk about the process of those petitions, the orders of protection petitions being heard remotely, and how the safety planning can help them be effective?
Yeah, the orders of protection, it can be quite a lengthy process in terms of the fact that it can take several hours even just to write one. But we screen that with someone and we go over all the different types. We go over and we ask certain screening questions right from the get-go, and we will explain the process in its entirety. And okay, so if we send this in, you can also take it back, and that's okay. And we make sure that when we send in a petition, we've gone over that with someone. The process, there's certain criteria that needs to be met in order for one of our advocates to write what we refer to as a family offense petition. That's the form that we submit into family court to try and obtain an order of protection. And you know, we go over those relationships, make sure that that qualifies, and then we do a danger assessment, and then we go over that form. Although there's a lot of times where it's just not safe to do. And so then we have to work around that. And you're hearing a lot throughout this program about safety planning. And that's kind of a loaded word in itself. Like, what is a safety plan? And it's going over all the different options and outcomes. And so, okay, if this is being done, what could be the outcome? And if that is the outcome, then what would the next steps be? And it's sort of going over almost like a movie of what's about to happen. And that can help someone when they're in an abusive situation. Like, hey, okay, I know my exit, my safest exit when I'm in this room, and if I'm being attacked is this way. I went over a safety plan with my kids, and we recommend that you go over with them yelling the word fire. Because if you're saying to your child, you know, hey, daddy or mommy is hurting us, don't, you know, if you hear me scream, run away, they might say to that parent, like, hey, I was told if you're hurting us, we got to run away. And so we also use that piece as being very effective of, fire drills. And so going over fire drills with someone. So there's all these different layers with those safety planning. And in particular with the orders of protection, we go over that multiple times in multiple different ways, saying it this way and also saying it that way, so that we can ensure that this is what that person wants and what is necessary.
It's important for our clients to understand before they even, when they walk in the door and before they make the decision about, I want an order of protection, that it has to rise to that legal level. The lethality assessments are now catered to also to intimate partner violence in men, right? And in same-sex couples, because there's a little different variation of the questions. How does that work?
So the danger assessment is an evidence-based questionnaire that we perform and go over with our clients. And there's ones that are tailored to certain populations as well. There's an immigrant woman assessment, and then there's a same-sex repeat violence assessment. And so we will do that with someone. We will ask those important questions. We look at, is that person unemployed? Did they ever put their hands on you while you were pregnant? Do you have any children that are not theirs? And there's all these different things that we're looking at. And there's a weighted score with the answers to those questions. And family court and judges are trained to recognize what those scores mean.
What do you think are the biggest red flags? And when we do fatality reviews, there was a New York State fatality review team, domestic violence fatality review team, that has, I believe, completed 26 domestic violence homicides in the last several years. What are they seeing in terms of these cases when we have a fatality?
I think the presence of a firearm in an abusive situation increases the risk of lethality or homicide by 500%. That is something that we look at and take very seriously. So anytime that the abuser has access or owns firearms, we certainly are, spidey senses go up and we want to take a look at that. In addition to break-ins, we're finding the fatality review was looking at the fact that break-ins were a large part of a risk to someone. And so that is now something that we've added into our intake process, is screening for any type of break into a home. And I think another indicator is that strangulation piece. And any type of cutting off of breathing is so important to recognize and look at. But again, orders of protection are not just for these physical things that are happening. If there have been credible threats, if there have been threats either directly or indirectly made to someone's life or their children or a family member, that's also taken just as seriously as a physical abuse.
Dr. Taroni, there's a great question in the chat box, and it's a good reminder. If you're thinking you have a question that we haven't addressed yet, by all means, please pop it in the chat box. We get the best questions virtually, usually. We do these presentations all the time. And people ask questions that if they were live at the Family Justice Center on a tour, they would be too embarrassed to ask. Hold nothing back, because your question could make the difference for a much richer presentation tonight. Vanessa, does a safety plan give someone a small sense of security to reduce stress and anxiety? Great question. How would you answer that?
Yeah, and it's a really great point. Like, again, a safety plan may not be an exit strategy for the relationship. It could be kind of small and subtle strategies to kind of reduce the amount of physical, sexual, emotional harm that you or other family members in the home are experiencing. So that can be extremely empowering to be able to kind of mitigate that harm, and having support, creating a safety plan from someone, and experiencing kind of success with a safety plan can really help a person kind of start to have that hope and think about like taking further next steps. And in addition to like calling the Family Justice Center yourself if you're experiencing abuse, there's also kind of safety planning ideas as a loved one or a family member or friend that you can kind of help engage in. So again, like Ava said, whether you're experiencing this yourself or you're a loved one, these strategies can be really helpful.
Dr. Troney, the Family Justice Center's advocates are all about crisis counseling. We refer out to experts like you. Long term, what does that look like?
That's also a great question. So, I do work with individuals who are still in those crisis stages. Like I mentioned, helping address some of the mental health effects of these experiences can really put someone in a better position to kind of take control over things. But I also have worked with individuals who experienced these kinds of behaviors as a child in their family house growing up, or in a relationship that happened 20, 30 years ago. And unfortunately, sometimes people have even maybe been too ashamed to seek therapy, or they may have ended up matching with a provider that was not trained in some of these evidence-based trauma therapies. They may have had kind of more like venting sessions sometimes with a therapist where they never really got into talking about the trauma. And again, like some of the news here though is that even if that trauma happened years and years and years ago, the talk therapy can still be very effective if you're willing to give it a try.
I've heard from a number of survivors over the last decade and a half since I've been at the Family Justice Center who say that a trusted friend or doctor or even a religious person, um, reverend, recommended marriage counseling. And they said that piece of advice nearly got them killed. Why? Vanessa.
Oh, sorry. Yeah, I mean, that can be so hard, right? When you experience pressure. And sometimes this can be another kind of thing that comes across judgmental, even though it's not intended to, pressure to prioritize that relationship above all else, even when the cost is your physical and your emotional well being. So we really encourage folks. Even if part of you thinks you may want to maintain this relationship, kind of seeking out some support on your own if you can, so you can feel like you can be honest about some of these behaviors that you're experiencing, and get that one-on-one support if you need it.
If you have any questions or if you're feeling triggered or just thinking, I need to talk to an advocate, pick up the phone and call the Family Justice Center. Our number is 716-558-SAFE. That translates to 716-558-7233. You can just talk to an advocate. After hours, I think our hours are on the slide. It will roll over to the National Domestic Violence Hotline. Ava, I want to talk to you a little bit about what the trajectory looks like when it comes to the journey out. And what have you seen in the last year or so? Are people escaping in the middle of a pandemic, quarantined, and are they doing it safely?
Yes, the resiliency and strength of our clients. I think it's something that we knew prior to the pandemic, but we now have a deeper understanding and respect for that. What individuals have been able to do during these unprecedented times is something that we haven't seen before. And so finding, ways to stay safe, and not only stay safe, but leave a relationship during a pandemic. And we are seeing that. And that comes with a lot of things that happen. And so they have to sometimes outweigh, like, I might lose this, but I'm going to gain that. And it's not easy. And that's also what we're here for. And so if they're struggling, finding a day where, you know what, there's a lot right now, and I don't know how I can keep doing this, can call and speak with their advocate. And we, again, do that safety plan, which does not include just physical things that, as Dr. Vanessa mentioned, we also look at wellness aspects and other ways that we keep someone empowered and their strength up.
I want to change a little bit of a conversation here and to communities of color. There are people watching this, and we know because at the Family Justice Center, we engaged some major research on the east side of Buffalo because we weren't seeing clients where we knew the high crime and the high poverty and the numbers of calls of police were the highest. And we weren't seeing them come down to the Family Justice Center. So we engaged a researcher from the University of Buffalo, Dr. Noel St. Ville, to talk to people about why they weren't coming downtown for services. And these are people of color. And it was very informative research. Well, we don't like the name. You're called the Family Justice Center. What's justice? We don't like the fact that police are co-located there. They don't, we've called them, and that was a disaster. They don't like the fact that CPS is a partner. You know, they want to get in our business and take away our kids. So we now partner with Harvest House over on the east side of Buffalo. And it's been very enlightening because communities of color, and I'd like to pull up this slide, the third slide that we're going to share with you tonight, talking about and showing the stats how communities of color are more severely impacted with the systemic inequities, often meaning lower income, less access to necessary services, and we address that barrier. Ava, do you want to talk about what you're seeing there on the slide and what we're seeing in reality?
Yeah, we hear a lot from clients of color. I'm not calling the police and I'm not filing charges because if I call the police, there's a potential that, he's going to be shot dead. Or, if I file charges, they're going to go to jail for a really long time or they're already on parole or probation. I do not trust the system. And that is something that we take very seriously and we understand. And again, it falls back on that piece of being validated and feeling heard and feeling like, okay, I'm believed. And, we run into where clients have fought back, as mentioned previously. And so they think that that automatically discounts them from receiving services. Well, you know what? I said a lot of stuff and I actually pushed him into the wall, or she pushed me into the wall, and then I punched them back. And so we have all these additional barriers. And that's something that we look at and we move through with that client. And again, it's about choice and empowerment. You do not want to file charges. You do not have to. You don't want police involved. You do not have to. And our safety plan goes around those barriers as well. We find too that it sometimes takes several attempts working with that client, to figure out what the best plan and framework is. But again, pushing that choice and empowerment piece and really having that understanding and having someone feel validated and heard is tremendous and we find extremely effective.
Dr. Troney, we hear from so many of our clients that they feel this isn't an abusive relationship. It's just all my fault. Well, they've been brainwashed into believing they caused it, they're responsible, they deserve it. How does the emotional and psychological abuse on the part of the controller break somebody down into so many millions of different pieces?
Another really important question, and relatedly, I know we focused a lot on discussing physical violence because we are so worried about loved ones who are experiencing that. But we actually know that emotional or psychological aggression, in and of itself, can cause very severe depression, can cause suicidal thinking. If you have someone demeaning you and putting you down on a daily basis in these very severe ways. And so the perpetrator of psychological aggression will be saying things all the time like, you're no good, you're the reason that I'm hurting you. No one else will ever want you if you leave me. And so these thoughts become very ingrained. And it's actually a symptom of both depression and PTSD, unfortunately, for our thinking to become more negative. So both because of what the perpetrator is saying and because of those actual mental health symptoms themselves, the survivor is much more prone to have really low self-esteem, to not believe in themselves, which is again why kind of getting these folks as much support as we can is so important. And one of the things that we do work on, if folks are open to trying therapy, is kind of learning to recognize some of these negative thinking patterns and challenge whether or not they're true, so that you can start experiencing some kind of successes in your life and remember kind of that you are this strong and competent person.
In your history and work as a clinical psychologist helping these people, what do you see as the biggest challenges for you professionally sitting there in a virtual session trying to help somebody through it, especially when it's at the very beginning
Hmm.
of your
It can
work with them?
definitely, yeah, there can definitely be a lot of shame and hesitancy to discuss these experiences. And I think so. One of the things I work as hard as I can is creating space to validate people's experiences and why they've kind of had to make the life choices that they've had to. I think related also to community of colors, it is another very significant barrier that unfortunately there are fewer people of color in my field, right?
Mhm.
So as a person of color, not only may you be encountering all these systemic barriers to seeking help, but it can be hard to talk to someone that you're not sure if they kind of know your lived experience. Um, and we work at that, right? We work at kind of trying to give affirming care, but it can still be really difficult to open up.
How do you know that somebody has is making progress and is now turned and that journey to healing and hope and mental health is on the right track?
Yeah. So there are multiple ways. I mean, a few things to kind of keep in mind when you're looking for a therapist, because you get a say over whether you want to work with somebody or not, right? If you meet with someone that first time and they say things that are invalidating either to your culture, your identity, or your experiences, you have the right to say like, no, this isn't a good match, right? But one of the things to look for is, do you have a provider who's being clear with you about what their treatment plan for you is? Do you have a provider who's doing formal assessments of your symptoms so they can kind of track whether or not you're making improvements during therapy? You definitely want to work with someone who is respectful for you and also has like a game plan.
Ava, I want to bring you into this as well because our clients will tell us, and survivors on the other end of this, some 20 or 30 years out, said, it's work. It's a lot of work. And you've got to love yourself. What does that mean? And what kind of advice is that for somebody who may think, all right, I'm ready to go?
Yeah, it exactly. It is a lot of work. And oftentimes we find that, someone's had these injustices done to them and they want that other person to pay for it, or they want them to somehow be able to fix it for them. And the reality is, healing takes a lot of time, and oftentimes it's a choice, and there's a lot of work and effort in that. And so it's a constant struggle with someone who's on that journey, who wants that other person to pay, and they want justice. And justice doesn't always look the same for everyone, nor does it look the same in terms of what is able to happen. And so, helping someone through that journey, letting them know that every single point and piece and part that they feel is normal. You're going to have really, really good days. You're going to have really, really awful days. And it's going to be a roller coaster for a bit of time. And then you're going to start to see the other side. But as you mentioned, it does take work. That's why having a supportive community, having people who understand what domestic violence is, what abuse is, and what it does, not just physically or emotionally, but all the areas in life that it affects. Having providers like Dr. Vanessa who completely understands it and also can provide that supportive network is so important, because the more outside support, the safer we can make it for someone to leave what is actually happening in the relationship, the better chance we have that it's something that they feel is doable and that they can attain, is that healing and that safety.
Ava, there may be people who were just itching to tune in tonight, but couldn't because they didn't feel safe. What can we do to help those that we think might benefit from this program? How do you have that conversation without insulting them or imparting judgment?
Yeah. Again, if you are wanting to have that conversation with someone or somehow approach it with someone, link with an advocate, or even, if you're working with Dr. Vanessa, talk to her about it, because that language piece is very, very important. And you can have all the good intentions and love for that person, but if the words that you're saying don't match, or if they feel on the spot, having that conversation in a place that's safe for them, not in public, not in earshot of the abuser. There's all these different factors that play into it, and we can help provide the words for that and the setting for that as well. So reach out to us in any capacity that you feel comfortable. And again, you don't have to give a ton of information. If you only want to give your first name and you only want to be contacted by email, that is fine as well.
All right. Dr. Vanessa, Ava, let's talk about resources locally, nationally. What's out there and where would you turn? And I know that we have so many people watching tonight because they're worried about somebody else. And Ava, you just did a superb job. But it also helps to educate yourself too. What would you recommend?
I recommend knowing that you can dial 211 from your phone 24/7 to be linked with any type of service or support in our area. So if you're looking for emergency shelter and you're like, I know it's Haven House, but I don't know their number and I can't look it up online, dial 211. If you want to reach out to the Family Justice Center and you can't find our information, dial 211. So having that in your back pocket is extremely important. Dial 211 and you can be linked with anyone, anywhere, anytime.
Dr. Vanessa, we know that care for your mental health, you articulated this numerous ways tonight, is critically important coming out of an abusive relationship if it helps you not repeat the cycle. We know support groups are a best practice, and there's not enough of them around. We're about to roll out several in the next couple of years. What can you say about support groups and why they're so critically important and effective?
Yeah, so I think on the one hand, it's one-on-one therapy can be great because you have someone to help like kind of guide you out of the hole, right? But on the other hand, it you don't necessarily get that kind of feedback from your provider um, of a shared experience, and that's what can be so powerful about support groups is um, again with all the isolation we've talked about, right? The isolation that the perpetrator will kind of enforce from that power and control standpoint, the isolation that comes from shame. It really can be a way to break out of that isolation and shame, to know that you are by no means the only person experiencing these things, or the only person kind of fighting to get better and change your life.
Ava, hope. There's an actual science now, and Ava and I have been working with Casey Gwynn, who's the founder of the FJC. He's the visionary of the FJC model. And we actually created and drafted a little piece of outreach material giving hope language for people. Can you just give a little rundown of some of the most effective things that you can say to somebody to just introduce a little hope into their situation?
Yeah, the language that we use, which I know we've spoken about throughout this program, is so important. And we are now finding that little words like don't or can't or won't are negative. And so having the words that are positive and introduce hope into it, like I'm worried about your safety. I care about you. I care about your children. Sometimes we're finding the word worried doesn't inject a lot of hope. And so using the word care, that can make all the difference in the world. And again, even us as advocates, we are constantly having our language at the forefront of what we are doing. Okay, it's best practice to say it like this, and it's something that, we are always looking at. And so if you're wanting to have that conversation, link with one of us, and we can go over that, because having those words that have hope attached to it is so important, because as hard and horrific as this work can be, it's also extremely rewarding and very hopeful.
Every day we have the great pleasure of seeing people walk out our door or hanging up the phone or closing their computer, because we're doing everything virtually, headed for hope and healing and safe havens, and someday a chance at a healthy relationship, not with the perpetrator. Dr. Vanessa, can you talk to us about how perpetrators and controllers don't change? And that's one of the reasons it takes somebody 7 to 8 times to return to the abuse and leave before they realize, I'm not going to make a difference to change this person.
Yeah, unfortunately, there are cases sometimes where, a partner will lash out one time and feel intense remorse and never do it again. But we know that in the majority of cases, once a relationship becomes sexually or physically violent in particular, it will not only continue in the relationship, but it tends to increase in frequency and intensity over time. And so that's one of the reasons, again, potentially, if you're worried about any of these things, anything like this is making you feel unsafe, kind of reaching out for support and feedback earlier rather than later could be really life saving.
Okay, we're going to wrap up in the next few minutes. Vanessa, last words, takeaways you'd like to discuss.
Yeah, I'd just like to kind of thank anybody who joined us today, whether you're a loved one or you feel like you may be experiencing some of these things in your relationship yourself. It can be a really big step to acknowledge that something's wrong, and there are lots of folks out there who want to help.
Ava, we know the most dangerous point in one of these relationships is when somebody tries to leave, can accelerate into a fatality in the snap of a finger. Final words of wisdom to somebody worried or somebody in that position.
No matter where you are in this process, and no matter what your role is in this process, so whether you're the survivor or you're worried or you care about someone that you think is experiencing abuse, we are here for you. We hear you, and we will help assist you in any way possible that we can. You are not alone. You do not have to do this alone. And there are so many services and supports, and we are here to help.
All right, thank you. There's a quick question. First of all, I want to thank Dr. Vanessa Tyrone. The question was, are you local? And yes, the question is yes. You can reach out to the Family Justice Center and we'll put you in touch with Dr. Tyrone. And Ava Thomas, our operations manager at the FJC, thank you both so very much. On behalf of Toronto Public Media, Buffalo Toronto Public Media, I'd like to thank the panelists, again, Ava and Vanessa, and everyone who has joined us tonight virtually. WBFO's Mental Health Initiative is funded by the Patrick P. Lee Foundation. If someone you know is experiencing abuse, or if you're feeling, I'd love to talk to somebody, please don't hesitate to pick up the phone and call the Family Justice Center. Our number is 716-558-7233. And when we get on the other side of COVID, doors are open. We invite you to come into the Family Justice Center for a tour. You can get more information about that on the website. And everything we do, the partners that we work with, much more information on our website as well. Thank you, everybody, and good night.